Welcome to the Creative Penn podcast. I'm Joanna Penn, thriller author and creative entrepreneur, bringing you interviews, inspiration and information on writing craft and creative business. You can find the episode show notes, your free author blueprint and lots more at thecreativepenn.com, and that's Penn with a double N. And here's the show. Hello creatives, I'm Joanna Penn, and this is episode number 756 of the podcast, and it is Friday the 14th of June 2024 as I record this. In today's show, I'm talking about writing through fear with Caroline Donahue, and we talk about the most common fears that writers have, as well as our personal experiences of them, how you can break through your fears to write what's on your heart, and why many fears are so far ahead of us we should just ignore them and keep writing. For example, the fear of, what if I get cancelled or sued for this book, yet you haven't even finished the first draft? So all of that is coming up in the interview section. In Publishing Things, the Alliance of Independent Authors blog has an article on how to avoid indie author scams, which is a must-read because seriously, there are so many, and I have nearly fallen for a couple of them. It outlines the different types, so literary agent scams, film studio impersonators, review bombing extortion, publishing services, Amazon partner scams, paid interviews, AI-assisted plagiarism, phishing emails and more. So definitely go and have a look at that. And in general, if you get an email that says, oh, we've discovered your book and we really want to publish you or make a movie of your book or interview you, but you just have to pay us, then that is not something to go ahead with. So have a look at that blog post. I'll link in the show notes. That's on selfpublishingadvice.org. And also have a look at Writer Beware, writerbeware.blog, which has lots more details on individual issues. Now, on the Self-Publishing Advice podcast with Orna Ross and Joe Solari, they explore essential financial strategies. Last week, as this goes out, they talk about survivorship bias in the indie author community, which really made me stop and think. Joe said, this is a popularity market where there is this really steep curve of success and failure monetarily. We have a lot of titles that just don't sell. And for every one of the successful author, there has to be 999 who are not successful. And this is really challenging for me. I listen to this and I say, no, it's not true. But then I think that I am one of the survivors, I suppose. I'm still here. And since I started in the self-publishing space in sort of 2008, a lot of people aren't here anymore, or at least you don't hear about them anymore. Many authors publish a book or two, which is completely fine, and they've achieved their goal, or they decide it's not worth it for them financially to continue, or they decide to do something else with their life. But this is also the kind of thing that makes me mad because I truly do think that you can make a good living as a creative, but it might look different to how you thought it would. So perhaps that's the issue, that people think, oh, I write one book, I make $1 million, I can retire and write by the sea and my life will be sorted. That is the myth of the industry and the sort of what we see in the movies and stuff like that. And I still get emails every week. In fact, I got another one this week that said, so why haven't your books been made into movies or TV shows yet? As if that's some kind of my fault. And I have to explain that it just doesn't work that way for most books and most authors. But of course, Joe does go on to say you need to take the shot because the only worse thing than taking the shot and failing is not taking the shot at all. And they discuss the realities of a startup business because, again, a lot of startup businesses fail, and in any business, let alone the creative side of things. And that I just wanted to mention, for those of you who might not know, is that I ran multiple businesses before I became an author. from the year 2000, I was a freelance IT consultant on and off for 13 years. So I was running that as my own business. I did property investment. I ran a scuba diving business, not for very long, but I still did that, all of which taught me valuable lessons. I started writing in 2006 and started the Creative Penn as a business in 2008. And my business has multiple streams of income. The main ones are book sales in multiple genres under 2 names, in multiple formats and languages and countries, and rights licensing. And then this podcast and my Patreon community are another side of the business. And then I have other things like affiliate income, speaking. I used to have course sales. I don't have that anymore. But I had to learn that it would never be a sustainable long-term business from one book. And so I wanted to remind you of this, sort of reflecting on what Joe was saying in that podcast, because I was listening to it and I wanted to fight with him because I wanted to defend the chance that you could do this, while also retaining my own survivorship bias. But we're all at different stages, and what worked for me back in 2008 is very different to what's going to work for somebody starting right now. And I am 24 years into running my own businesses. I haven't been an employee for a very long time. And I am 16 years into running my author business. Orna notes, indie authors are impatient by nature. I think it's one of the reasons we choose it. And this is so true. It is, we want that success. Maybe this is the author thing too. We spend a lot of time on this particular book and then we think that is the book they're going to pay me for. But it might not be true. Sometimes we need to have more patience, whether that's with the editing process to make a better book or with our business growth. So it took me 5 years from 2006 when I started writing to 2011 to go full time. And even then, I took a huge drop in my income, like 90% drop in my income. We sold our house and investment property. We moved to a 1-bedroom flat. It took 4 years before I made it back up to my salary. Since then, I have surpassed it. But it was 8 years from then until we bought another house. So there are a lot of people who, when they if they want to go full time, they do downsize. I know a lot of people move to cheaper areas to live and all this kind of thing. So the overnight success is a myth. Like, it truly is. There really is no one who is an overnight success. And you need to enjoy the journey. So I wanted to mention that. Joe and Orna do talk about the mindset shift needed to run an author business, as well as budgeting, creating a production plan, and understanding your brand promise to the reader. But I was also thinking about this. I certainly did not have those things when I started. I had a sort of 1-page plan, I guess. It really was a goal rather than a plan. And I'm quite an intuitive business person as well as an intuitive discovery writer. And I've leaned into different things along the way. But I did always have an overarching goal to run a business and make a good living as a creative. That was my North Star, along with creating a body of work I am proud of, and that remains. But yes, it was a challenging podcast for me to listen to. So I suggest you have a listen as well. That's the Self-Publishing Advice podcast with Orna Ross and Joe Solari on essential financial strategies. Let me know what you think. So in AI news, the big news this week was WWDC, Apple's developer conference, where they deftly took the branding of AI and renamed it Apple Intelligence. Which is so, it is genius. Announcing the rollout of AI tools into the new Apple devices and a partnership with OpenAI, so the app will be on phones. Now, I think this is huge news. Like, a lot of people said, this is not that big a deal. And it is. It's an absolutely enormous deal, because it means mass adoption of AI tools by the end of the year, or at least within the next 18 months as people get new devices. Obviously, Microsoft already announced that they're putting AI into their PCs. What are they called? Copilot PCs, something like that. Google, everything I seem to do now within Google, I get prompted to use various Gemini things. This is going to be in the hardware and in the software. Well, I mean, the hardware is delivered with access to the AI software. So I think this is very interesting because a lot of people still haven't tried many AI tools. I've been using them obviously for years now. Well, a lot of people have been using them for years. You might not think you are, but whenever you use, anything with algorithms like Amazon or TikTok or Spotify or Netflix or all these things are running with AI-enabled tools. Of course, generative AI is different, and Apple have really locked that down into different ways, but it's still part of it. And so, yeah, I think it's good to remember that AI is like the internet, it's like electricity. It's not one thing, it's the platform, it's the enabler to do other things. It's a toolkit you can use to expand your possibilities. So think how much the internet is kind of embedded in our world now, in both our jobs and our businesses, but also our social life, our personal life, our entertainment life, our travel, all of this, all the benefits and issues we have with the internet, but would you live without it? I mean, I certainly wouldn't have this business without it. So yeah, most of us, I imagine, couldn't imagine living without the internet. And I think that's going to be the same thing with much of these AI tools. So think of AI more like that and consider that the more of us who use it responsibly, the better, so we can shape the future. And while, yes, there are still some open lawsuits around OpenAI in the USA, the fact that now pretty much all the biggest companies in the world are rolling this out, and many media companies are doing licensing deals instead of suing, any cases that are left are going to end in some kind of settlement payout eventually. Generative AI is not going away. So yes, and once it's on all the devices, people are just going to be using it natively. So Siri is improving on the Apple devices, but essentially they're going to have ChatGPT as an app on the iPhone from later this year. So there were lots of other announcements, and you can read an overview on The Verge, which I will link to, the biggest announcements. People seem particularly excited about the Genmoji, where you can use AI image generation to generate your own emojis. And I heard a marketing podcast talking about this, Marketing Against the Grain, and they were talking about how marketers are going to start using generated emojis in clever ways. One thing that might impact us is the use of Siri as an assistant to organise your email inbox and sort of sift through things, maybe even reply to things in the future. This kind of agent will definitely expand onto other platforms, and that may well have an impact on email deliverability and therefore email marketing. So the same thing happened when Gmail added the various tabs, and instead of going to the main inbox, things were going to updates and stuff like that. This is nothing new, and when that Gmail change happened, a lot of us tried to get you to open your emails and move us into the inbox tab. But yeah, we have to adapt, and I guess we just have to send emails that people look for, that they are interested in opening, and that means attracting readers and a community where people want to hear from you. So also on AI, for a wonderfully positive and uplifting interview on collaborating with AI as a creative person, have a listen to Massimo Bottura on the Possible podcast. Massimo is, I would say he's well known in the foodie world in Europe. He is an eccentric and wildly creative and positive chef. He was on the first series of Chef's Table. He's won many Michelin stars. He's often on the TV over here, and I love what he says in the interview. He says he is not a chef, but an emotion creator, an experience creator, and he just wants to move people, and he does that with food and experiences. And also he said this wonderful thing: we can't forget history, but we need to move forward, but we must take the flames, not the ashes. Take the flames, not the ashes, into the future. And I love this. I think this is a wonderful metaphor. Leave behind what is dead and done and build on what is living and inspirational and sets a fire in you. And this is why I've talked a lot about, sort of changing and re-examining our processes. What can we leave behind that is dead and done and ashes? And what actually lights this flame within us that we want to move forward with? So yeah, I think this is so interesting. I would love you to listen to that interview, whether, whatever you feel about AI, listening to someone like Massimo, he's an older guy too. I'd say he's mid-60s. So it's not like he's a sort of young chef on the cutting edge. He's someone who is very close to the earth. But yes, he sees beauty in chaos and says we're living in chaotic times, but let's keep trying to find the beauty. So that's the Possible podcast with Massimo Bottura. In personal news, as this goes out, the Kickstarter for Spear of Destiny only has one more day to run. So depending on when you're listening to this, it finishes on the 18th of June 2024. As I record this, it's just over £10,000 or around $13,000 US. We hit the first stretch goal, which means all backers will get Soldiers of God in ebook and audiobook. And I wrote that story based on a papal bull, Militia Dei. And yeah, that was a really fun short story. Even if you back the campaign for just £1, like the lowest thing, you will get those. And I narrated the audiobook. So yeah, if you fancy that, be quick. It's almost over, and the very sweet silver foil first edition will never be available again. While the funding amount is less than my non-fiction campaigns, that is to be expected when I've spent 15 years educating my readers to buy ebooks on Amazon. That's what I've done with my fiction, and that is what so many of us have done with our fiction. It's like, well, if you train people to buy in a certain way and then you try and change direction, of course it's going to be difficult. But while the funding amount is less, it is still my best fiction launch ever. And yeah, I'm super pleased with it. And considering most fiction advances are a lot less than that these days, I'm thrilled. If you backed the campaign, the surveys will be going out soon. The payments and completion and all of that take a couple of weeks. And then the books will be on the way. I need to book in my signing at the Book Vault Printer Factory, which is always fun. But yes, so if you have backed the campaign, you'll hear more about that. I'm back in input mode, seriously filling my creative well, which for me is critical in order to write and create. I'm doing some day trips. I had a day trip to Winchester Cathedral, which was fantastic, and pictures on Instagram and Facebook at JF Penn Author. But very interesting thing that I wanted to tell you about is that I've run up against a roadblock for the Gothic Cathedral project. So originally, this is intended to be my next Kickstarter at some point, which was a photo book of Gothic cathedrals in England. I love Gothic cathedrals. I've been visiting them for years. I write about them. I'm very inspired by them. And I wanted to do a photo book as well as essays on various aspects of Gothic. But I have run up against photography permissions. Those of you who are photographers will understand this. But this is not about copyright. The copyright of the photos, so whenever I go on these trips, I take lots of photos. So the copyright of the photos belongs to me. But cathedrals are private property. And on private property, you need permission to use photos commercially. And in the terms of entry for these cathedrals, because you have to pay to go in them, unless you are obviously worshipping at a particular point, it says no photos can be used commercially unless you get permission. So I can use them for personal use, for social media, but I need permission from all the cathedrals in order to publish a book with my own photos in. There is something called right of panorama, and again, this differs per country as well. Right of panorama in some countries where you can use photos you've taken if you're on public land at the time. But clearly I need to use internal photos, and often cathedrals own the land around buildings anyway, so you're never technically on public land. It also means I'm not in control of the timing of replies. I had thought I would try and get the Gothic Cathedral book done in time to get books out before Christmas, but I've already emailed one cathedral and have heard nothing. I need to follow up, obviously, and I spoke to another author, or I emailed with another author I know. He had to delay his project 6 months while he chased permissions. And that just made me go, oh, this kind of deflation. And in thinking about this, I realised that the change in energy for me around this whole permissions thing is the word even, permission. As an independent author, an independent creator, I do not need permission to write what I want and publish what I want, and neither do you. As an independent, as long as it's legal, of course, and you respect copyright law and all of that, you can write what you want, publish what you want, use your work how you like, you can give it away, you can sell it, you can sell direct, you can market how you like, you can basically do a lot if you create your own work. And I love this freedom to be in control, and the need to ask for permission has really knocked the energy out of the project for me. And of course, I've mentioned this intuitive need for creation that I have, and I feel almost like that creative spark has just been sort of tamped down by this. Now, I'm still thinking about it. It's just how I feel at the moment. I do not like asking permission. So I'm trying to decide what to do. I could just make it a memoir, narrative, non-fiction book of essays. I have already started writing, and it's turning into something that would be more like pilgrimage, as in it's sort of 50 to 60,000 words, aspects of memoir, thoughts on various things around. I'm using John Ruskin's work on Gothic, and I'm doing so much research on this. So the book could actually be that. I could do the Gothic Cathedral crime series, I was thinking, or I could just be patient and go through the process. Or I guess I could also pitch the project to a publisher who could navigate that permissions process. Because it's not just one cathedral, it would be quite a few. In the meantime, I'm going to write the Vineyard book while I do a summer of research trips to cathedrals, which fill my creative well anyway. Like, I love visiting them. But I did want to tell you about that, and also ask if you have any experience getting photo permissions in the UK or have any tips. Let me know. Joanna@thecreativepenn.com. And also let me know what you think about this idea of permission and how that makes you feel. I find it a very difficult word and energy. So while I think about what I want to do, I've started seriously writing the Vineyard book. It essentially gave me this moment of, all right, then I'm just going to do this other project first. I'm about 7,000 words into the first draft. I did a research trip to a biodynamic vineyard here in Somerset. And there is a great book, if you're interested in this topic. It's called Voodoo Vintners, Oregon's Astonishing Biodynamic Wine Growers by Catherine Cole. Yes, Voodoo Vintners, such a great title. But this will be a folk horror novel, which I'm calling the Vineyard book for now. I do have a title, but I'm not sharing it. There are photos of both of these trips on my Instagram and Facebook @JFPennAuthor. And also I'm starting to post everything on booksandtravel.page, not as a podcast, but more as sort of in-depth articles with a lot more photos. Also this weekend, I'm doing something which is related to the Gothic Cathedral project. I'm doing a weekend stone carving because I've been researching stonemasonry, and so this will be really interesting. Pictures will be up for that by the time this goes out. Also, just on personal stuff, I wanted to note that I am now speaking at Author Nation. My topic is Reinventing the Author Entrepreneur, How AI Will Impact Authors in 2025. Yes, I'll be channeling my futuristic and my strategic Clifton strengths to be sharing that. It will be a completely new talk, obviously, for that session. We'll also be having a patron meetup, and that will hopefully be on the Tuesday morning before everything starts, so you can meet other creatives. More on that in the Patreon. So thanks for your emails and comments this week. Mike said on the interview with Steve Piper, it's difficult to think about testing ideas before the story is written, but if it helps me reach readers, it's an interesting direction. Yes, I definitely also find this difficult. So for example, this Vineyard book, I'm not testing the ideas, I'm just writing it. Because that's what I do as a discovery writer. So I think it's really good to learn about these things and then see how it feels. Mel sent a picture of her black and white cat looking out into a summer garden, listening as the sun comes out in Oregon. So yes, please leave a comment on the podcast show notes at thecreativepenn.com or on the YouTube channel. Message me on X at thecreativepenn or email me and send me pictures of where you're listening, Joanna at thecreativepenn.com. I love to hear from you. It makes this more of a conversation. And I was actually laughing this week. I get so many pictures now, almost every single day, and they're obviously using the same template at the moment. These are all from different places, but they say something like, I listen to your podcast every week and I have it on replay, but they don't email me directly. They put it in my form on the website. And I quite frequently mention my email in the podcast. So yeah, there you go. If you are pitching a podcaster, make sure you're not lying. So anyway, I love to hear from you. It makes this more of a conversation. So today's show is sponsored by Kobo Writing Life, Kobo's free, fast and easy self-publishing platform. KWL was built by authors for authors, and their team of dedicated book lovers is always working hard to help you reach new readers around the world. Right now, digital books are reaching more people than ever before, and libraries are an integral part of that. You can easily reach library readers in your KWL account and earn 50% on every library sale, as there's no aggregator fee. Your book will be available to librarians to purchase for multi-loan use, but also for a one-time checkout option. If you're interested in taking part in library promotions, email KWL's dedicated author care team at writinglife@kobo.com and they'll add you to the mailing list. And don't forget to tell your readers that they can now pick up your book in libraries. And as ever, yes, you can order my book in libraries. If it's not there, just ask your librarian in ebook, print or audiobook. If you want to learn more about Kobo Writing Life, check out the Kobo Writing Life podcast, available wherever you're listening to this, and find them on social media. Create your free account today at kobo.com/writinglife. And on a personal note, I love Kobo. I've been with them since the very beginning, and it's one of the places I go direct to. I upload my ebooks directly on Kobo Writing Life and some audiobooks. I use the promotions tab. In fact, I did just yesterday log in and submit more books for promotions. And if you don't have that promotions tab, you can also email them about that as well, writinglife@kobo.com. So this type of corporate sponsorship pays for the hosting, transcription and editing. But my time in creating the show is sponsored by my community at patreon.com/thecreativepenn. Thanks to the 7 new patrons who've joined this week, and thanks to everyone who's been supporting the show for months and years. If you join the community, you get access to all my backlist videos and audio covering topics on creativity and AI, various tutorials, as well as mindset and business. Last week, I put out a video on how I used Steve Piper's click testing method for fiction and non-fiction books that were out already, which we talked about on last week's show. And this week, I'll be sending out the patron-only Q&A, which is about 45 minutes to 50 minutes of me answering questions from patrons. It's an extra solo show a month. It is a monthly subscription, the equivalent of buying me a black coffee a month or a couple of coffees if you're feeling generous. You get access to everything, all the backlist, and there is now a Patreon app, so you can listen to the audios really easily, or you can get them on a feed on your podcast app. So if you feel you get value from the show and you want more, come on over and join more than 1,100 authors. Thanks again to all the patrons, and you can join us at patreon.com, patreon.com/thecreativepenn. Right, let's get into the interview. Caroline Donahue is an author, podcaster and book coach, and her latest book is Writing Through Fear, a Story Arcana guide. So welcome back to the show, Caroline.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such a treat.
Yes, so you were on the show back in 2019 when we talked about your background and writing with the tarot. So we're just going to jump straight into the topic today. So why did you want to write about fear? What sparked the book and why structure it around tarot?
I think that the topic of fear evolved because there were a couple of projects I considered doing before I landed on this one. Like, there was there was a desire to take a course I created during the pandemic called Dream to Draft. And I thought, oh, I'll make a book version of that course. And I tried to do that for most of a year, actually, and realized that I couldn't really recreate the experience of taking that course. So I was trying to distill down elements of like what made the difference for people of being able to finish a book or not finish a book. And I noticed that they were able to overcome fears that they had while being in the course. And really the main difference between people who were finishing books and delighted with their progress and those who were getting kind of stuck in the swamps of sadness, if you'll forgive the 1980s film reference of the never-ending story, were those who just got completely mired in fear about their writing. And so I thought, okay, if I can help people to engage with their fear differently, then they'll be able to write. And I can do that from a distance. So that was what I ultimately got excited about. And as for why I paired it with the tarot, well, it was, for one thing, it made it a much easier book to write because I had a built-in structure. And I had wanted to return to the tarot ever since writing the previous book, which focused on the first 22 cards, the major arcana. And I thought, oh, this is a great way to address the minors because those are everyday life situations that people face. And so I matched one fear to each card, also because I could imagine people pulling a card. I've already had one person who's read the book respond that when they're about to start a difficult scene or difficult project, they'll pull a card and then read the corresponding fear entry in the book, and then it helps them get into the writing. So that was delightful to hear.
Yeah, and I mean, that is one of the very useful things, I guess, about tarot or any of these kind of things that spark ideas by looking at images or thinking about symbolism. And so I think that's actually quite a good way into these fears. So it feels like if you try and tackle it head on, it's often much harder, I guess. Did the people in your course, did they recognise their fears?
I think in some cases, yes. In some cases, it looked like other things. And, you know, we have in psychology, when I studied psychology ages ago, you have this kind of fight or flight, or we now have freeze that we know about and fawn. So there are different ways that people engage with things that scare them. And sometimes they look like the sort of cartoon scream face if you think of the horror movie, but not always. And so I thought that I wanted them to increase their vocabulary of how they could think about fear, and so that it wouldn't feel like they had gone wrong and that this was a sign that they shouldn't continue writing. I mean, fear comes up inevitably when we write, as you know, looking at the shadow and writing, you know, dark fantasy and suspense. That's part of the process of going into the fictional world. But that doesn't have to be the end point. Just because fear comes up doesn't mean you have to stop writing. And so I wanted them to be able to move through that and get to the other side.
Yeah, well, let's identify then some of the most common fears that writers face. What are some ones that you've encountered again and again in your students and also in yourself?
Oh, yeah, completely. I think if we had to boil it down, like if we could boil down almost every fear, underneath there is a fear of doing it wrong, that I am doing this wrong. And there's a lot that we can pick apart out of that because we have this weird language and belief structure around books. Like we read a book that we love in a bookstore, say, or we read one of the quote unquote classics, and we perceive it like, oh, that book is perfect. It couldn't have been written any other way, that it had this exact shape and form that it was supposed to take, and that nothing about it could change, or else it wouldn't exist as it does today. And I don't think that that's true. But a lot of people have this fear that they're going to make a mistake or they're going to do something wrong and the whole thing is going to fall apart. And that, there are many flavors of this particular fear, but it's sort of like, if you go back to the Robert Frost poem, there's two roads diverge in a wood. I took the one less traveled by. Most writers fear that two roads diverge in a wood and they're going to take the wrong one for their writing project. And then everything is going to fall apart as a result.
And that could be at different stages, right? That could be I'm writing the wrong genre, or I'm writing the wrong story, and then I made the wrong publishing choice. I've chosen the wrong marketing platform. I mean, it's not just one choice. It's over and over again.
So many. It can come up again and again. It's like a whack-a-mole fear. It's like, I ended the chapter at the wrong point. This character should have this motivation. The character has the wrong personality trait, or I've formatted the dialogue incorrectly. My grammar is wrong. Like, all of this sense is that real writers, quote unquote, I could write a whole book on that, this concept of the quote unquote real writer, but that real writers do it the right way, quote unquote. And I am scared that I am not doing it the right way. Therefore, I'm not a real writer. Therefore, I shouldn't be allowed to write at all.
So it's interesting you picked that one. How has this come up for you?
I think this used to really paralyze me. I mean, in my 20s, I wrote and abandoned about 5 or 6 novels, thinking that I had picked the wrong project. And I like that I had picked an idea that was unsalvageable. And I don't feel that there is any idea that's unsalvageable anymore. And part of that is because I read a book, it was a novel, a very short novel by an independent press called Love Notes from a German Building Site. And unfortunately, I can't remember the author in this exact moment. But it was essentially a character's musings, vocabulary lists. It's an Irish author writing about working on like an abandoned mall in Germany. So it's one of those ideas where if you presented it to me and said, would you like to read a novel about some guy hanging out on a mall construction site? And he's just randomly thinking about his relationship and is not quite sure where that's going. That really wouldn't get me going. However, I read this book and I could not put it down, and I loved it, and I haven't stopped thinking about it for years. And it's always been my example of there is no idea that cannot be executed on. You may not want to execute on it, or you may not be interested in it, but if you're engaged with the material, then you can keep going and you can find a way through. And I think that I didn't believe that was possible early on. And so I gave ideas up when I got scared, or when I felt like, oh, this isn't interesting enough. I don't know if this is going to work. And I felt like this means I've done it wrong. I've gotten lost. I'm lost in the woods and I'm never going to be able to find my way back. Rather than seeing it as a challenge and thinking, there is a way for this story to be interesting. How can I find the parts that I'm most excited about? How can I make the story about those? I didn't have the ability to trust at that point, because I think the antidote for this fear is trusting that there is a way through.
Yeah, and this is so interesting as well, being an independent author. So my first novel, Stone of Fire, I originally released it in 2011 as Pentecost by Joanna Penn. And then I've rewritten it like 3 times, and now it's Stone of Fire by J.F. Penn. The bones are still the same, but as my craft grew, I rewrote it. I learned about publishing, I learned about marketing. And I mean, the pictures of me with that book back then, I did do a lot of things wrong, but equally I had to take some steps in a direction in order to fix things later. And I wonder if the traditional publishing model is why people get so scared about this, because as soon as either you feel you failed because you didn't get a deal, or you do get a deal and then your craft improves and you look back. And you speak to a lot of traditionally published authors on your podcast, the Secret Library podcast, which we'll come back to. But where do you see this being perhaps worse for traditionally published authors, because you just don't get the chance to change things?
I think I think this fear starts much, much earlier in life. I think it starts with the way our education system is organized. I mean, we have an education system that was built for an industrial age, which is not entirely relevant anymore. I mean, I think back to Sir Ken Robinson's incredible talk on YouTube about creativity is as important as literacy, and we need to be able to get something wrong and be willing to change it. But essentially, from a very young age, we have to take tests and we get a mark, and then it's determined what we should be doing, what we think we're good at, what paths we're allowed to follow. And I think that sense of being sorted into being an artsy kid or being a science kid or not being good at school, if that's the case, can have a really strong impact of like, I have one chance to take this test and I won't have a chance to take it again. Or if I write a paper and I misunderstood the assignment, then I just get a bad grade. There's no chance to take that back. And I think we internalize that message really, really early. And because so much of our education, when this happens, is about writing essays and writing papers that we then get graded on, I think it all comes back up when we write later in a way that's going to be published. And yes, we don't get grades, but we do get reviews, however we publish. And I think that this is really deeply embedded, and I hope that we are more willing to write things, learn from them, and be willing to change and grow and write more things.
Yeah, I think you're right. And actually, this brings me to a fear, and I talked about it in Writing the Shadow, which is this fear of judgment, because I was told as a kid when I wrote in school a dark essay about a nightmare I had, and I was told that really wasn't appropriate to write, that I shouldn't write those things. And so I still struggle with this fear of judgment, like what will people think of me if I write this? And I feel like this fear in particular is amplified in our cultural situation where people worry about getting cancelled. So the fear of judgment is not just a bad review or someone saying, why, you know, what type of person are you? But it's also your career is over, which I mean, people should probably fear not selling any books more. But what do you think about this fear of judgment, fear of being cancelled?
Yeah, I think it is it is very present and it's very loud, I think, in the world right now. And I think the fear of being judged, I mean, to an extent, I have to go into putting any book out knowing that somebody is not going to like it. So somebody is not going to like my book, and I have to be okay with that. Because if everybody writes my book, then I feel like I haven't taken a real stand on anything. So there is that side of it. However, I feel like the fear of getting cancelled is a whole other can of worms. And I am seeing that more, that kind of real large-scale rejection of authors or writers in certain situations in the arena of traditional publishing, for sure. Because that's where you're seeing sort of dramatic, not often anymore, but whenever someone gets a big advance, then there's a lot of pressure, and then everything gets amplified in that situation. And I think the other thing that happens is that a lot of people fear judgment and fear getting canceled when they haven't finished the book yet. And what I have noticed is that the critic, the sort of internal critic that is yammering these fears in your ear, tends to leap ahead to the next unknown step in the process. And I've watched this over and over and over again with students. So in the beginning, it's like, oh, I don't know if I can finish a whole novel. I don't know if I have enough to say. I don't know if this idea will carry a long enough story. So then we move forward and they've written an entire draft. Then it's like, I don't know how to revise. I don't know how to do this. And then they immediately forget how difficult writing the first draft was. And they just want to write a new book. And they're like, oh, it was so much easier. Writing first drafts was so much easier. And I think, remember that part when you thought it wasn't going to be possible and it was totally impossible to do this? But as soon as they get comfortable with revision, then there start to be fears about publication, fears about rejection, fears about bad reviews. And sometimes this is quite far away from when the book is coming out. So I always encourage people to try any aspect of the story that they think should be included, and that you can always decide later if you feel good about it being in there, if it feels right. But if you have a sense, oh, I think this character needs to go in this direction, try it, because you're always going to regret holding back and not exploring a deep line of story. And so I think that the canceled thing is almost like a blown up fear of people misunderstanding what you're trying to say, fear of being misread, fear of being just wrong. I think, again, it's a fear of doing it wrong.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny you said that. I often get people will email me and they'll be, I'm really worried that I'm writing this memoir and someone's going to sue me. Like one of my family is going to sue me. What if I say something bad? And I'll often reply, so where are you? And they may not have even started the book.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's a very, very common, and I think you're right. So this comes to a fear. So we're recording this the day before my next Kickstarter launches. Now, this is my third Kickstarter. By the time this episode goes out, it will probably have finished. But there is this fear. I have a great fear. This is my third one. I've been doing writing and publishing for 15 years. I am scared of failure. And like you said, doing something wrong. And there's almost I say, well, it's a good problem to have, but some people know who I am at this point. I do have people who will watch this. And that is kind of scary, because what if I don't fund? What if I am a public failure? And it is terrifying. And what's interesting is I know lots of people who will not even do a Kickstarter, and I was one of them a couple of years ago, because of fear of this public failure, because everyone can see how much money you make. So I wondered about you on this, because I think I had said to you, why don't you do a Kickstarter for this one or one of your other books? What do you think about this one?
I think some of it is about what kind of experience do you want to have putting this book out? And I think that part of being a creative, part of the reason that we're not accountants, which is always the profession I seem to gravitate to in these examples, is that things are unpredictable. We never know what's going to happen. And we have to accept that we're unsure how this Kickstarter is going to go. But the question that I always ask, and this is one of the ones that I put in the book, is what am I making this mean? Because there are two things that are happening here. You've got a book that's coming out, and there's a Kickstarter that people can support. And people may or may not support that. But there are lots of reasons why that might happen that has nothing to do with the value of your writing or your book. And I think that we are very quick to assign all the blame that something might not work on ourselves, and to make it mean something global and permanent about us as writers. When in reality, let's think about it. If we had a Kickstarter start the day various global disasters that we've had over the past few years happened, would that impact the Kickstarter? Probably. And so, but that doesn't mean that it isn't a very well-written, exciting project. So I think we take a lot of responsibility on ourselves, and we give a lot of authority to the outside world to determine the value of what we're doing. And I think that, in many ways, is what makes it so debilitating.
Yes. And so I guess acknowledging these fears are an important part of it, and realising that that might be a form of a block. Being scared of doing something is a block to our growth, even if it's not a block to our writing. It might be the fear of publishing, as we said, or the fear of marketing. What are some other kind of practical ways to get past these fears other than recognising them?
I find that breaking them down into much smaller pieces is very helpful. So if you have an item on your list, or on either, whether it's a bucket list or your project list, because you're working on a project that is so large you could not complete it in a day, let alone a week, let alone months. So if there's an item on there like finished novel, then that tends to create blocks because your mind doesn't know how to engage with it at all. Rather than, okay, make notes on chapter 3 about how this character is going to get stuck in a cave. I just made that up. You know, that's something that you can actually do in a sitting. So I find that making sure to break things down into smaller bits helps to deal with blocks, because often blocks are not even about fear. They're just about the brain is not able to process an item that large and has no way to engage with it productively. So that's one thing that can happen. Another thing that can happen is that there's something going on underneath. And I think that this Kickstarter example you gave is one of those examples. So it's like, okay, plan the Kickstarter, execute the Kickstarter. You've broken it down into little tiny steps and it's still not happening. And I think that's because there's some sort of belief lurking underneath. So if you find you're trying to do something with your writing project, and that might be making notes about chapter 3 and how we're going to get her stuck in the cave, and you just cannot sit down and make any notes about this cave, then I think it's important to look at, okay, what am I making this mean in this moment? What am I feeling underneath here? Where am I afraid I'm headed? Where am I afraid this is going to happen? With the Kickstarter, it could be, I'm going to be humiliated. No one is ever going to buy another one of my books again if they see this flop. And if you have this issue about the making notes about going into the cave, it could be about, I'm afraid I'm going to make the wrong choice for the story. And so whenever we get to the heart of what the fear is, I find looking at, okay, well, what if that happens? Don't try to avoid it. We're all like, la, 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 with our fingers in our ears, and we don't want to think about, what if the Kickstarter flops? We can't think about that. Or what if I make the wrong, quote unquote, wrong choice about the story? What if we think about it? Okay, if the Kickstarter doesn't work out for this book, then what will I do? What will I do next? And if we have a plan in place, I find that immediately it doesn't feel quite as loaded, because things that are unknown and amorphous and undefined are very difficult to engage with, in the same way that a giant to-do list item is very difficult to engage with. But if I say, okay, the Kickstarter fails, then I would probably go ahead and release the book and just not do the hardback edition or whatever I had planned to do with the Kickstarter. Then that's probably what I would do. Because then we have to ask the question, I mean, I'm getting in the weeds with the Kickstarter, but it's like, okay, what was I kickstarting? Is this more about people being strapped for cash at the moment than it is about book sales or interest?
Yeah, I think you're right. And coming to that question, what's the worst that can happen? And with a Kickstarter, it is the worst that can happen is you don't fund. And as you said, you have to figure out a different way of publishing. And sure, it's pretty embarrassing, but hey, you can mitigate that by putting a really low number on your funding. Which, you know, even now I do. But I think what's interesting, you said this earlier, that part of being creative is this unpredictable nature. And that is why we do it. As you say, if we wanted a repeatable monthly career, I guess, like in accounting or bookkeeping, that kind of monthly, it's the same every month, and that's not what we do. And if there wasn't a level of unpredictability, then I guess we would be bored and we wouldn't do this. I mean, one of the reasons people stop writing books in a series and they move to another series or they change genre is because they get bored, right? So I think embracing the unpredictable nature of creativity is part of the fun, I guess.
I think we just have to remind ourselves that sometimes. I mean, one thing, this is a really weird neurological trick, is that the physiological symptoms of anxiety and fear and the physiological symptoms of excitement are quite similar. And sometimes you can reroute it because the nerves are actually quite close together that fire when this happens. So I had a psychologist once say, you know, you can get it to jump the track if when you're feeling all of that pent-up anxiety and excitement, to just say over and over, I'm excited, I'm excited, I'm excited. Like, what if this is really about you being super excited about the Kickstarter rather than scared?
Yeah, that's actually used to come up in professional speaking, and most people are more scared of speaking in public than they are of dying. And
they're more scared of speaking in public than anything.
Than anything, yeah. So I did
literally anything. They'd rather get their leg torn off than speak in public.
Yeah, so when I did my training more than a decade ago, I remember one of my professional speaking teachers, and he used to say, it's not about getting rid of the butterflies, it's about getting them to fly in formation. So it's sort of that, harnessing the butterflies, which when you're about to speak, I still get bad stomach and I need the toilet every 5 minutes and all of this kind of stuff. And I still feel very, very nervous, but I try and reframe it, as you say, as excitement. And it's interesting because with speaking, you've got that moment when you're going to step onto a stage. And so I guess for authors, it could be pressing like the launch button on Kickstarter, and there actually is a launch button, which is different as opposed to setting up a pre-order isn't quite so scary. But I guess sending off a pitch letter, for example. But again, when you do that with publishing, there's more of a time delay, right?
Yes.
Whereas speaking, it's like, there's the stage, you're either on stage or you're not.
Exactly. And it's so clearly defined. So I think it's easier to deal with. But the thing with writing is that there is a lot of lurchy process. There's a lot of hurry up and wait. I spent months writing this draft. Then I went through the process of edits. Then I went through the process of the cover designer, giving notes, all of this. And then formatting all the files and getting them uploaded everywhere. That's a lot of busy work. And then it goes out and you just have to wait and see. I mean, you keep talking about the book, you share it, but there's really a point when you have to let go of control. And I think that, in many cases, at least for me, is the scariest part, is having to just sit and wait and be patient and not know exactly how it's going to go and not be able to do something constantly to influence that.
Yes, well, coming to, I guess, changing things later and the business side of things. And this is interesting because you rebranded that first book and you recovered it to match this new release. So tell us about, first of all, why you did that and also the challenges of changing a book title and a book cover.
So, yes, I decided to rebrand the book, which came out as Story Arcana in 2019, because this is one of those, why was this not completely obvious to you, Caroline? I subsequently launched a course also called Story Arcana, and then wondered why people were getting confused as to what content was included in the course and what content was included in the book. And they are quite different. So I was having to explain this constantly. And so when this book was going to come out, I thought it would be really nice to have a cohesive look for a series of books. I've always admired your cohesive look on your series of guides for writers, and thought, okay, this is my chance to do that. And this is also my chance to really make it clear that this book is different than the course and yet related. They're all related to tarot, but they are different content in each piece. So that was the original thought process. And then I wanted to dive into a look that felt more reflective of the tarot aspect. And so it was fun to get a cover designer to share the sort of look and feel that I wanted. I wanted it to feel a little bit like a tarot card and yet be linked in some ways to the brand that I have. She used the same font for my name that I have on my website so that it was all sort of connected. But yeah, I just wanted something that stood out more and that stood out as a unit. And it ended up being a really satisfying process.
Yeah. So what are the challenges of doing it though? Because I mean, like practicalities, I've done this multiple times, but people always are like, oh my goodness, how do you do that? Don't you lose all your reviews on the first book? Like, what were some of the more technical challenges?
Oh yeah. I mean, it was what my big fear was, if we're going into the fears, was that somebody would buy the book titled The Author's Journey, get it, and then say, this is just like the book I have already. What is this? So one of the technical challenges was figuring out how to be very clear. So I put it on the copyright page. This formally, this is a second edition. I have it listed as the second edition on all of the sites. So I had to find places to mention that it was a second edition. It had been formerly published under this title. And I wanted to be really transparent about that. So that was one of the challenges. And I think I was okay with losing the reviews because I just wanted to start fresh and I just wanted it to feel different. And so, yes, you do go back to zero with those, but I was confident that those who had read the new book would then possibly want to read the old book or would just be able to jump over to that, and it would just take care of itself over time.
Okay, well, that is interesting because you don't have to lose your reviews if you upload the files into the same Kindle. You have to publish a new print book, but with Stone of Fire, there's reviews on there from when it was called Pentecost originally. So all I've done with the Kindle, and we're just talking about Amazon, but all the sites are the same. With the Kindle book, you can just upload you can change the title, you can change the author name, you can change pretty much everything. You upload a new cover, upload a new file. Print books, as you said, you have to upload a new print book. But what I found is, because most of my reviews were on the Kindle book anyway, when you link a new print edition, it just links up like that. And you have to use a new print book when you do all of that new. So you don't have to lose it. But as you said, if you were happy starting again, I think there's a difference between deciding it's a completely new edition, which is different to a new cover. Basically. I didn't want to mislead anyone, but I also changed the cover to increase discoverability. Like, I had blurbs now, or people who were willing to blurb the book. So I wanted people to see a cover with those on it. And I was hoping that this wasn't about like a pretty new edition for the existing reader, that this would increase discoverability for additional readers. And then the other bit was that previously I did all my distribution through Ingram, and this time I distributed through Amazon separately, in addition to doing distribution through Ingram. So, for your print. So you did ebooks through Ingram before?
I did. And now I have done again, just because I do not have this sort of enthusiasm that you have to separately go to Kobo and Nook and all of these places and upload files. I was like, it's okay with me. It's going to go to all of them under that umbrella. I haven't gone quite as wide, but I sort of shift that as I go. But that was part of the reason as well, was that I had not gone through KDP the first time, and now I have.
That makes sense. But this is also interesting. It kind of circles back to at the beginning. You didn't do it wrong. You did it the way you wanted to do it at the time.
Yes.
And then you changed your mind later on and you wrote another book and it emerged and thus it became something different. And so you changed it. And this is the magic, right? This is the magic of being in control. You can do whatever the hell you want. Yay!
Yes. And that has been really great. It was like I could dip my toe in and do what I was comfortable with in 2019. And I've learned a lot since then. And I was excited to apply it. And so that's what I did.
Well, then on that, are you narrating the audiobook?
That has been a fun question to consider, because given that, and I'm sure you face this conundrum as well, given that I have a voice that people know from the podcast, I feel like I want to narrate it myself. I have had someone offer to narrate it who has a lovely voice, and I have been going back and forth about that. But I think in the end, I will probably do it myself, just because I feel like podcast listeners would expect my voice as part of it. I think that with fiction, I do not plan to narrate my own fiction, because I have a limited range of voices I can do, but most of them are impersonating my cats. And I don't think anyone wants to hear a murder mystery with cat voices.
Oh, I don't know. Cozy cat mystery is a thing.
It is, but that's not what I write. So sadly,
there we go.
Sadly, there's a mismatch on that one. But yeah, I think part of it is mostly just having the personal bandwidth to go back in and do this. And so I think the audiobook is probably going to have to wait till the fall, because I've got a novel up on deck to finish this summer. And I'm so excited to get back into that I don't want any distractions from it. So I think the audiobook is maybe going to come out later this year.
Yeah, but I think it's a good choice to narrate it when it's nonfiction, when it's like a personal book, when you have a podcast and you're used to doing audio. All of those are very good reasons. So coming to the podcast, you are currently on season 10 of the Secret Library podcast, which is great, and people should go listen to that. And you have recently moved to Substack as a platform. So I wondered if you could maybe comment on podcasting and Substack as marketing platforms that for new authors or for existing creators who are thinking about different options.
Yes, absolutely. I think that there were many reasons why I wanted to bring the podcast over to Substack. I had spoken to a number of creatives who had done so and had had a positive experience. And I think that one of the first reasons was that the sort of justification or the original logic of creating the podcast was to build a community around the topic, and also to build a community resource for writers. And I had done a lot of bizarre things, which I don't recommend. Like, I don't recommend having multiple Substacks that are separate publications. I think that the sections feature is a better way to go. And so at the end of 2023, I decided I wanted one Substack to rule them all, which is now called Book Alchemy. And so podcast episodes go live, but I also write sort of longer form, or not always longer form, but different reflections on writing life that feels very like a blog that I very much enjoy. And so I wanted those two to live together. And I wanted there to be an opportunity for people to comment and to just have more conversation around the process. Because as a podcaster, it can feel quite weird and lonely to just record a bunch of stuff and put it out there. And then people would write back to newsletters and such and say how much it meant to them. But there isn't really a dialogue around the content. And so part of moving to Substack was around wanting that conversation to happen. That hasn't entirely developed yet, because I think after 9 years of doing this podcast, people are really used to being subscribed in their podcast app, and they listen when a show shows up, but they are not really trained. I never really encouraged or trained them to click through to the show notes and interact. So I think that has been a slower process. And I think it's more about encouraging people already on Substack to listen and then be in the conversation there. Because the people who read my articles are very eager to have comments and chat, and we go back and forth all the time, and I love it. So that has been really nice. It's just about getting the podcast into that headspace as well.
And do you think your book sales are primarily from your existing audience, or have you found that Substack has been useful for the book launches as well?
I think it has, in that I have done some things like currently, as we record this, I have a book giveaway open. So I'm going to give away 3 books in a couple of days, and they're open to anyone who is an annual subscriber to my Substack. So I'll be drawing. So it's sort of like if you remember, you're entered into this drawing. And I plan to continue that practice because it's really fun with like people who are on the podcast who have books coming out. We can do book giveaways for their books and such. So that's been really fun. And people are really eager to reshare this kind of thing. If you have an event like that going, people are happy to share. And it's just a really nice, supportive community that I've found in my corner of Substack specifically.
Oh, that's great. So where can people find Writing Through Fear and your Substack and the podcast and everything you do online?
Absolutely. I think the easiest place to go is carolinedonahue.com. You can find the book page. There is a handy dandy banner at the top that you can click on to get to the book order page. And the book is available on Amazon pretty much everywhere. It's on Kobo all over the world. It's at Barnes & Noble, many outlets. But there is a page for the book when you click through, and it has all of the places that are currently available in pretty much every English language market. So that is there. And then the Substack is at book-alchemy.com. And you can get to the podcast at secretlibrarypodcast.com. It'll forward you right to the podcast page. But you can search for the podcast on pretty much any podcast player, and it's there.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for your time, Caroline. That was great.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's always a joy to talk to you.
So I hope you found that episode with Caroline interesting. And of course, we all face fears as authors and in life in general. And understanding this doesn't make them go away, but hopefully you feel less alone and able to tackle at least your creative fears. And check out Caroline's podcast, The Secret Library. As ever, I love to hear from you. Please leave a comment on the podcast show notes at thecreativepenn.com or on the YouTube channel, or message me on X at thecreativepenn, or email me, joanna@thecreativepenn.com. Coming up later this week, I have an in-between-isode on collaborative writing with AI with Rochelle Ayala, who has some great insights into how to think about AI tools. And next week, I'm talking about writing hard truths and tips for writing non-fiction with Efren Delgado, who is a former FBI agent. In the meantime, happy writing, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. You can find the backlist episodes and show notes at thecreativepenn.com/podcast. And you can get your free author blueprint at thecreativepenn.com/blueprint. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on Facebook and X at The Creative Penn, or on Instagram and Facebook at JFPennAuthor. Happy writing, and I'll see you next time.